Veteran Dad only had $50 for a blind date. The Patriot at the next table watched him, and if you love American stories full of culture and emotion, subscribe now. Leave a like. Comment what you think about this story and share this video so more people can enjoy them too. John Miller sat at the kitchen table of his modest Ohio home, staring at the last $50 bill he owned. He knew it should go to groceries, gas, or maybe his daughter's school needs. Yet tonight it meant something different, the fragile hope of a fresh start. He wondered if risking it on a blind date was foolish. His heart wrestled between fear and the need for companionship. The clock ticked on the wall, breaking the silence in steady beats. Emily, his 9-year-old daughter, looked up from her homework with innocent eyes. "Dad, you deserve to be happy too," she said gently, her voice lifting his spirits. John wanted to believe her, but doubt lingered in his chest. Still, her words gave weight to the moment. He had faced war overseas, fighting battles that tested every ounce of his courage. Now he fought a quieter war at home, the war of dignity against the weight of bills and loneliness. His uniform had been replaced with dusty boots and calloused hands. The pride he once carried as a soldier felt buried under exhaustion. His sacrifice seemed invisible to the world around him. He pulled out a weathered wallet, a gift from his late father, and slipped the bill inside. Resting his hand on the leather, he whispered a quiet prayer. "Lord, give me strength to keep going," he murmured, eyes closed in reflection. It was never easy to admit how heavy life felt, but faith, however fragile, was all he had left. Emily rose from her chair and wrapped her arms around him. Her small frame pressed against his chest as she whispered, "Mom would want you to try." The memory of his late wife hit him like a wave, but Emily's innocent hope gave him courage. John kissed her forehead, holding her tight, promising silently he would not give up. He walked to his bedroom and dressed as neatly as possible. His shirt was faded but pressed, his boots polished to hide their wear. Standing before the mirror, he tugged at the collar and straightened his shoulders. The reflection showed a man older than his years. Yet behind the lines of struggle, resilience still lived. The cool evening air brushed against his face as he stepped outside. Crickets sang in the distance, filling the quiet street. His old pickup coughed and groaned before the engine roared alive. At the doorway, Emily waved with a glowing smile. He waved back, reminded once more of his purpose. Driving through town, John passed homes lit with golden light. Through windows, families shared laughter over warm meals. He tightened his grip on the wheel, aching for the family he once had. The contrast deepened his loneliness. Yet still he pressed forward, refusing to surrender to despair. The small-town diner came into view, a flag waving proudly outside. The stars and stripes glowed under the streetlight, strong against the night wind. The sight filled John with a spark of pride. For all his struggles, he remained an American fighter. The flag reminded him of battles fought and honor earned. He parked the truck and sat for a moment, gathering strength. Tonight was not about money or status, but about dignity. He whispered to himself that courage wasn't just for war zones. Courage was for nights like this, too. With a steady breath, he stepped out and walked toward the diner. The diner's bell jingled as John pushed the door open. Warm smells of grilled steak and apple pie drifted through the air. The walls displayed framed photos of veterans, flags, and old newspaper clippings. A folded American flag sat in a glass case. This place felt like the very heart of small-town America. He paused just inside, adjusting his shirt collar nervously. A waitress greeted him with a polite smile and led him to a booth. He nodded his thanks, sliding onto the seat by the window. His hands rested tightly together on the table. He ordered only a black coffee, guarding the money left in his pocket. Around him, voices filled the room like a comforting chorus. Farmers discussed crops, older veterans traded stories, and teenagers laughed over milkshakes. John wrapped his hands around the warm cup, trying to steady himself. The chatter felt distant against the storm inside his chest. Still, he forced himself to look calm. Steam curled from the coffee, fogging his glasses for a moment. He wiped them with the corner of his sleeve, then looked outside. The flagpole stood tall, lit by a single streetlight. He remembered brothers lost in combat, their names carved into memorial walls. The sight of the flag whispered of duty, honor, and sacrifice. Minutes crawled by with no sign of his date. John checked his phone again and again. The screen offered nothing but silence. His chest tightened as doubt crept in. Had he risked his last dollars on false hope? The thought pressed heavier with every passing second. He glanced at the other tables, observing the happiness of strangers. Families laughed, couples leaned close, children sipped sodas. His eyes drifted to a woman across the room. Her dress was simple but elegant, her posture strong, her gaze sharp yet kind. Their eyes met briefly before he turned away in embarrassment. The waitress approached again, asking if he wanted food. John hesitated, then shook his head firmly. Coffee was all he could afford tonight. She gave him a quiet nod, her expression understanding. Still, shame burned in his chest, knowing she likely guessed his situation. He looked down at the cup, pretending not to notice. Outside, passing cars cast streaks of light across the window. Each time, John straightened in hope that his date had arrived. Each time, disappointment followed as strangers passed by. His shoulders slumped as the minutes stretched into nearly an hour. The silence inside him grew heavier. He whispered his daughter's words again, clinging to them. "Dad, you deserve to be happy." But hope was fading with every tick of the clock. Still, he stayed, unwilling to walk out defeated. Pride anchored him to the booth. His chest swelled with stubborn dignity, even in the face of humiliation. For John Miller, surrender was not an option. He had worn a uniform that demanded perseverance. He had survived battles that most could not imagine. Tonight, in this diner filled with strangers, he fought another battle, one of faith and resilience. And even if no one noticed, he would not quit. John sat at the booth by the window, his coffee cooling as he stared at the door. Every time the bell above it jingled, his heart jumped with nervous hope. Strangers came in, families, couples, friends, but none were her. His hands tightened around the cup, as if gripping his pride. He whispered to himself to stay calm. The minutes dragged like hours, each one heavier than the last. John checked his phone again, but no new messages appeared. He scrolled back to the last text, reminding him she had agreed to meet. His chest tightened with doubt, wondering if she had changed her mind. Still, he told himself to wait a little longer. The diner buzzed with normal life, yet John felt invisible inside it. Forks clinked against plates, laughter echoed, and country music played softly in the background. but none of it touched him. His thoughts stayed locked on the woman who hadn't arrived. Pride demanded he sit tall, but loneliness pressed hard. He sipped the bitter coffee, though his appetite had vanished long ago. The taste was sharp, but it grounded him in the moment. He tapped his fingers against the table, a steady rhythm to silence his nerves. The waitress passed by, giving him a sympathetic glance. John forced a faint smile, pretending all was fine. Outside the window, the flag on the pole swayed in the night wind. Its steady movement reminded him of the discipline he once carried in uniform. Soldiers waited, too, for orders, for battles, for homecomings. Waiting was part of life. Yet tonight, waiting brought no honor, only a hollow ache. He clenched his jaw and stayed. Another 20 minutes passed, each second heavier than the last. Hope began to shrink, leaving only shame in its place. John shifted in his seat, wondering if the whole town noticed his humiliation. He imagined whispers forming at nearby tables, though no one actually spoke. His pride begged him to walk out, but he couldn't move. At last his phone buzzed with a new message. Relief shot through him, only to vanish when he read the words. It was a cruel text from his supposed date, mocking him for showing up. His stomach turned cold, his face flushed with humiliation. He lowered the phone slowly, his breath shaking. For a long moment, John sat frozen, staring at nothing. He swallowed hard, forcing the tears back, refusing to let anyone see weakness. The humiliation burned deep, like a wound no one could treat. His chest ached, but his pride commanded him to stay composed. He straightened his shoulders, holding his ground silently. The waitress returned, asking if he wanted a refill. John nodded without speaking, afraid his voice would betray him. The steaming cup landed gently on the table, her kind eyes offering quiet comfort. He gave a small nod of thanks, though words stuck in his throat. The world moved on while his heart bled inside. He lifted the cup again, staring into the dark liquid. Inside he saw his reflection, tired eyes, weathered lines, and a man fighting unseen battles. Humiliation clawed at him, but so did determination. He had endured worse in life, and he would endure this. John Miller was not going to break here. As the minutes stretched into an hour, John realized his date would never come. The cruel text lingered in his mind, cutting deeper than he wanted to admit. Around him the diner carried on with ease, families laughing, forks scraping, voices warm. Yet he sat alone, feeling every eye on him. The silence inside grew deafening. He shifted uncomfortably in the booth, adjusting his warm shirt. His hands trembled slightly as he folded his phone and tucked it into his pocket. He couldn't let anyone see him shaken, not here, not now. His pride had carried him through battles, and it would carry him through this. But pride felt heavier than ever. A lump rose in his throat, stubborn and unyielding. He stared at the flag outside once more, drawing strength from its steady presence. "Hold the line," he whispered, recalling words drilled into him as a soldier. Holding the line now meant refusing to walk out broken. He clenched his fists, breathing slow and steady. The waitress stopped again, her tone soft. "Would you like to order something real to eat?" she asked gently. John forced a polite smile and shook his head. "Just the coffee, thank you," he replied. His voice was calm, though inside it wavered. She nodded with quiet respect and left him alone in his silence. Humiliation pressed down harder with every passing second. He imagined how foolish he must look. A veteran with no money stood up in public, clinging to dignity. But he kept his head high, refusing to collapse under the weight. In his heart, he knew surrender wasn't an option. He was too proud to break. He replayed Emily's voice in his mind. "Dad, you deserve to be happy." The memory stung because tonight happiness felt impossible. He pictured her innocent eyes, always so full of faith. He couldn't let her see this failure. He couldn't let her think her father was weak. That thought alone held him upright. Shame and anger collided inside him, a storm without release. He wondered why fate seemed so cruel, why good men were left unseen. He had carried rifles, dug trenches, stood guard for his country. Yet here he was, abandoned in the simplest battle of all, to be valued. His chest heaved with silent rage. Still, he stayed seated, his back straight, his gaze steady. Walking out defeated would wound him more than staying. If humiliation was the price, then he would bear it. Quietly, he reminded himself that strength wasn't always loud. Sometimes strength was just not leaving. He sipped the coffee and endured. At a nearby table, Catherine Hayes watched silently. Her eyes lingered on the veteran pin, glinting on his jacket. She noticed the way he carried himself, proud but tired, fighting a private war no one else could see. Something stirred in her heart, though John had no idea she was there. The night pressed on, heavy with unspoken weight. John remained in his booth, anchored by stubborn dignity. Humiliation had cut him, but it hadn't destroyed him. His story wasn't finished yet. Across the diner, unseen to him, a new chapter was quietly waiting to unfold. At a nearby table, Catherine Hayes quietly set down her coffee cup. She had noticed John the moment he walked in, his posture sharp but weary. The veteran pin on his jacket caught her eye, a symbol of service she deeply respected. She could see the struggle he tried so hard to hide. Something about his dignity stirred her compassion. Catherine was no stranger to sacrifice herself. Her father had served in Vietnam, and her family had carried that legacy with pride. Growing up, she had learned to honor men like John, men who gave without asking anything in return. Now, as a successful businesswoman, she carried those lessons with her. And tonight she felt them stronger than ever. She observed the way John forced a smile at the waitress, though his eyes betrayed quiet pain. She saw how he straightened his shoulders, even when the cruel text nearly broke him. There was a nobility in his silence that few could recognize. Catherine knew she couldn't ignore what she was witnessing. Something told her she was meant to act. The diner around them carried on as usual, but her focus stayed locked on him. Every detail, the tight grip on his coffee cup, the clenched jaw, the steady eyes, spoke volumes. This wasn't a man seeking pity. This was a man holding the line, even in humiliation, and that strength moved her deeply. Her own meal sat untouched as she thought about what she should do. She wasn't sure if approaching him right away would be wise. Pride was often a soldier's last defense, and she respected that. But she also knew that sometimes kindness had to break through walls. She decided to wait for the right moment. The waitress came by John's table again, asking softly if he wanted to order food. Catherine leaned closer, listening to his reply. "Just coffee," he said, voice steady but thin. Catherine's chest tightened. She recognized the tone of a man who had gone without more than once. It was a sound she could never forget. Her mind raced as she thought of her father. He had once told her, "The strongest men are often the ones fighting silent battles." Looking at John, she finally understood those words. Here was a man carrying a weight heavier than most could bear, and still he sat with pride. That alone demanded respect. She motioned for the waitress, whispering quietly. "Put his meal on my bill," Catherine said firmly. The waitress raised her brows, then nodded knowingly. Catherine sat back, her heart pounding. It wasn't about charity. It was about honor. She wanted John to know he wasn't invisible. His sacrifice mattered. The waitress soon returned to John's table, placing a hot plate of food before him. Catherine watched as confusion spread across his face. He shook his head, insisting he hadn't ordered anything. When the waitress said, "It's been taken care of," he froze. Suspicion clouded his eyes, thinking perhaps it was another cruel trick. Catherine's heart ached as she saw his doubt. She knew she couldn't stay silent any longer. Rising from her seat, she steadied herself, ready to step in. Her heels clicked softly against the floor as she walked toward him. For John Miller, the night was about to take a turn he never expected. John stared at the steaming plate of food in front of him, his brows furrowed as he tried to make sense of it. "I didn't order this," he said firmly, his voice edged with suspicion. The waitress only repeated, "It's been taken care of, but by who?" His heart pounded with unease, fearing another humiliation. Before he could press further, a calm voice spoke from behind. "It's not a mistake," Catherine said gently. John turned to see her standing there, her presence strong yet kind. She wore a simple navy dress, her posture upright, her expression respectful. For a moment, John was too stunned to speak. "It's not charity," she continued, her voice steady. "It's respect. You serve this country, and you deserve to be seen." Her words struck deep, cutting past his walls. Pride and gratitude collided inside him, leaving him speechless. He wanted to resist, but part of him longed to believe her sincerity. John cleared his throat, his eyes lowering to the plate. The food smelled warm and rich, stirring hunger he hadn't felt in days. Still, his pride clung to him like armor. "I can't accept this," he muttered. Catherine shook her head gently. "Sometimes the strongest thing a man can do is accept help." Her words lingered. For the first time that evening, John felt something shift. He studied her face, searching for pity, but finding none. Her gaze held only respect, the kind of respect soldiers understood. Slowly he nodded, the weight of resistance easing just slightly. His hands trembled as he picked up the fork. The first bite sent warmth through him, almost overwhelming. He hadn't realized how empty he had been until now. Catherine slid into the seat across from him, her movements calm and unassuming. She didn't speak right away, letting the silence hold. John chewed quietly, unsure how to thank her. Finally, Catherine broke the silence with a gentle question. "What branch?" she asked, nodding toward his veteran pen. John swallowed hard, then answered softly, "Army?" Her smile deepened with understanding. "My father served in Vietnam," she said. "I grew up learning to respect men who carried burdens most people never see." John studied her, trying to gauge her intentions. She didn't look like someone searching for attention. Her tone wasn't boastful or rehearsed. She simply meant what she said. Slowly, his guarded heart eased a little more. It had been years since someone looked at him without judgment or pity. The conversation flowed cautiously, like two rivers meeting for the first time. Catherine asked about his service, his life, his daughter. John answered carefully, but her patience made it easier. For the first time in years, he felt truly heard. It wasn't charity, it was connection, and it unsettled him. As the night carried on, John realized something he hadn't expected. The humiliation that had once burned so fiercely had been replaced with a fragile spark of hope. Catherine's presence didn't erase the pain, but it softened it. For the first time in a long time, he felt less alone, and that was everything. Catherine leaned forward, her eyes steady on John as he wrestled with pride. He shifted uncomfortably, still unsure if he should keep eating. "It's not charity," she said again, her voice calm but firm. "It's respect. You carried this nation's flag into battles most people can't imagine." Her words broke through the silence. John froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. No one had spoken to him like that in years. Most people avoided the subject of his service, either too awkward or too dismissive. Hearing the recognition in her tone struck something deep inside him. He swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. "I don't want pity," he finally said, his voice low. Catherine shook her head immediately. "And you don't have it," she replied. "You have honor, and honor deserves recognition." Her tone carried a conviction that reminded him of his drill sergeants. This wasn't empty kindness, it was respect built on truth. The diner noise faded into the background as their eyes held. For the first time that night, John felt like someone actually saw him. Not as a broke single dad, not as a man left behind by society, but as a soldier, a father, and a man who still stood tall. That recognition steadied him. Catherine leaned back slightly, giving him room to breathe. "My father used to say strength isn't about standing alone," she added softly. "It's about knowing when to let others stand beside you." John stared at her, surprised by the words. They echoed something his own captain had once told him overseas. It left him shaken. He put the fork down and rubbed his hands together, struggling to contain his emotions. Pride and gratitude collided in his chest, threatening to break him open. Catherine didn't press, letting the silence speak for them both. It was a kind of silence soldiers respected, heavy but meaningful. Slowly, John picked up the fork again and continued eating. Each bite felt like surrender and strength at the same time. Catherine gave a small, approving nod, but said nothing more. Her restraint felt like another form of respect. John realized he was letting someone in, even if just a little. For the first time in years he felt lighter, though the weight of shame wasn't gone. Catherine's reminder of his worth touched something sacred inside him. He thought of Emily and how she always called him her hero. Maybe she was right. Maybe being broken didn't erase what he had given. When he finished the meal, John sat back, overwhelmed but steadier than before. Catherine offered a soft smile. "Sometimes this country forgets the people who built it," she said. "But I don't." Her words landed heavy, yet healing. For John, it was the reminder he didn't know he needed. As the waitress cleared the table, John gave a slow nod of thanks. His pride was still bruised, but Catherine's presence softened the edges. For the first time that evening, hope flickered where humiliation had been. Across from him, Catherine knew this was only the beginning. Catherine stayed seated across from John, her posture relaxed yet attentive. "Mind if I sit a while?" she asked. John hesitated, then gave a slight nod. He wasn't used to company, especially from someone like her. Still, something told him this wasn't a woman with hidden motives. She was simply present. The waitress refilled their coffees, leaving them alone once more. John took a sip, letting the warmth steady him. Catherine studied him quietly, then asked, "How long has it been since you had a meal like that?" He looked down, ashamed to answer. Finally, he admitted, "Too long." The honesty surprised him. Instead of pity, Catherine responded with understanding. "My father used to go without to make sure we were cared for," she said softly. "Sacrifice runs deep in men like you." John's throat tightened, emotions swirling. For once, someone wasn't looking down on him. She was lifting him up with respect. They began talking, cautiously at first. John told her about his time in the army, about the long nights overseas and the quiet battles afterward. Catherine listened without interrupting, nodding as he spoke. She shared stories of her father's service and the lessons he taught her. Slowly, trust began to form. John ate more slowly now, each bite mixed with conversation. The food filled his body, while her words filled something deeper. He hadn't spoken so openly in years. Catherine's presence made it feel safe, like he wasn't being judged. The walls around his heart began to thin. At one point, John laughed quietly at something she said. The sound surprised even him. It had been so long since laughter came naturally. Catherine smiled, encouraged by the small crack in his armor. For the first time all night, the air between them felt lighter. Still, John couldn't ignore the weight of pride. "I don't know why you're doing this," he admitted. "Most people don't even notice me anymore." Catherine leaned forward, her eyes steady. "Because I was raised to never look away from people who serve this country," she said. Her sincerity left him silent. The conversation stretched on, weaving stories of sacrifice, honor, and resilience. John found himself speaking of Emily, his daughter, the anchor of his life. Catherine's eyes softened at the mention of her. "She's lucky to have a father like you," she said. John looked away, hiding the tears that threatened. The diner began to empty as the night grew late. Still, they remained at the booth, two strangers drawn together by something unspoken. John realized this evening, once meant to humiliate him, had shifted into something different. It wasn't a date. It was a moment of dignity restored. As they rose to leave, Catherine placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "You're not invisible, John," she said. "Not to me." Her words echoed in his chest as he walked out into the night. For the first time in years he felt the faint warmth of hope return, and that hope would not leave him. The next morning, John dropped Emily off at the local library before heading to work. She loved spending hours among the books, reading stories of heroes and adventures. For Emily, the library was a safe place, filled with hope and possibility. She wandered the aisles, humming softly to herself. That day, fate brought her face to face with Catherine. Catherine had come to donate a collection of books in honor of her late father. As she carried the box inside, she noticed a little girl sitting at a table with her nose buried in a book. Emily's bright eyes and warm smile caught her attention. Something about the child felt familiar, though Catherine couldn't place it at first. Emily looked up politely and greeted her. "Hello, ma'am," she said, her manners a reflection of her father's teachings. Catherine smiled and asked what she was reading. Emily proudly held up a book about American pioneers. "I like stories of people who don't give up," she explained. The words struck Catherine deeply. As they talked, Catherine asked her name. "Emily Miller," she answered without hesitation. Catherine froze for a moment, recognizing the last name immediately. Her heart tightened as she realized this was John's daughter. She sat down beside Emily, sensing an opportunity to learn more about the man she had met the night before. "Your dad seems very strong," Catherine said gently. Emily's eyes lit up as she nodded eagerly. "He's my hero," she replied. "He always tells me that being strong doesn't mean never falling. It means always getting back up." Catherine's throat tightened at the child's simple but powerful words. Emily lowered her voice, almost as if confessing a secret. "But sometimes I think he's lonely," she admitted. "He tries to smile, but I can tell when he's sad. He needs someone to remind him he's not alone." Catherine felt her heart ache at the honesty in Emily's voice. Children never lied about what they felt. Catherine reached out, brushing Emily's hand gently. "Your dad has more strength than he knows," she said. Emily smiled faintly, her innocence shining through. "I just want him to be happy again," she whispered. Catherine realized then that John's battle wasn't just about money or pride. It was about belonging. The librarian called Emily over to choose another book. She ran off happily, leaving Catherine seated with her thoughts. The conversation lingered, pressing on her heart. Emily's truth revealed more than John ever could himself. Catherine now saw the depth of his struggle more clearly than before. As she left the library, Catherine made a silent promise. She would not let John face this battle alone. His daughter's faith deserved to be honored. Catherine's father had once told her, "Real patriots don't just wave flags. They lift up the ones who carried them first." And that lesson rang louder than ever. Walking back to her car, Catherine felt determined. She had seen John's strength at the diner. She had heard Emily's truth at the library. Together they painted a picture of resilience wrapped in quiet suffering. Catherine knew her role was no longer just an observer. She had been called to step in. Later that week, Catherine invited John and Emily to a community event her company sponsored. The event was held at the town's Veterans Hall, decorated with flags, banners, and photos honoring service members. It wasn't just a gathering, it was a celebration of sacrifice. Catherine hoped John would feel the respect he deserved. John hesitated when he received the invitation. Crowds made him uneasy, and pride made him wary of being paraded around. But Emily begged him to go. "Please, Daddy," she said. "You always tell me heroes should be remembered." Her innocent plea struck him, and finally he agreed. Together they walked into the hall. The moment they stepped inside, John felt the weight of the atmosphere. Fellow veterans stood tall, some in worn jackets, others in wheelchairs, but all carrying the same spirit. Patriotic music filled the air, and the smell of home-cooked food drifted from the kitchen. For the first time in years, John felt like he belonged. Catherine greeted them warmly, introducing Emily to the other families. She noticed how John's eyes softened as his daughter laughed with new friends. Pride replaced the tension in his posture. Slowly the humiliation from the diner faded in the presence of shared respect. It was a different kind of strength, one he could accept. As the program began, a local official took the stage. He spoke about the sacrifices veterans made, reminding everyone of their courage. John listened quietly, his heart swelling as words of honor filled the room. When the crowd applauded, he felt the praise reach him too, though he tried to remain humble. Catherine stayed near, watching his every expression. She could see the change in his demeanor, the way his shoulders straightened, the way his eyes brightened. He was remembering his worth piece by piece. She felt proud not of what she had done, but of what John was rediscovering in himself. Later, John was approached by another veteran, an older man with silver hair. "You're Miller, right? Army?" he asked. John nodded, surprised. "Heard good things about you," the man said, gripping his hand firmly. That simple acknowledgment sent a wave of pride through John's chest. He felt visible again. Emily tugged at his sleeve, smiling from ear to ear. "See, Daddy? People remember," she said proudly. Her words struck him deeper than anything else. In her eyes he was still a hero, no matter what life had thrown at him. That spark of hope, once faint, now burned brighter. As the evening ended, Catherine caught John's gaze. "This country still needs men like you," she said softly. John felt the truth in her words. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe it. Gratitude swelled in his chest, not just for her kindness, but for the reminder of who he truly was. Walking out of the hall with Emily by his side, John felt a warmth he hadn't known in years. It wasn't about money or status. It was about dignity, honor, and belonging. Catherine's invitation had given him more than a night out. It had given him back his place. And that was the spark of hope he needed. After the event, Catherine approached John with a thoughtful look. "I want to ask you something," she said. John raised his brows, unsure what was coming. Catherine continued, "My company could use someone with your discipline and leadership. Would you consider working with us, even part-time?" Her offer caught him off guard. John hesitated, his pride rising like a wall. He had spent years building with his hands, not in offices or boardrooms. "I don't know if I'm the right fit," he admitted. But Catherine shook her head firmly. "Character is harder to find than skill. You have both." Her confidence unsettled him. Emily, listening nearby, tugged at her father's arm. "Daddy, you should try," she said with a hopeful smile. "It could make life easier for us." Her innocence cut through his doubts. John looked at her and saw the reason he worked so hard. Her happiness was worth swallowing his pride. Still, he wrestled with the idea of accepting help. Would people see it as charity? Would they think he was weak? But Catherine wasn't offering pity. She was offering respect. Her tone was steady, her eyes unwavering. "This isn't about saving you," she said. "It's about building together." John nodded slowly, though his chest still felt heavy. "I'll think about it," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. Catherine gave him a reassuring smile. "That's all I ask." Emily grinned, already imagining a brighter future. For John, the thought of stability brought both hope and fear. That night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Memories of the army came back, times when leaders had trusted him with missions bigger than himself. Maybe this was another mission, just different. He wondered if he still had what it took to lead. His heart whispered that he did. By morning he made his choice. He walked Emily to school, kissed her forehead, and promised her he would try. Later that day he called Catherine and accepted her offer. "Part-time for now," he said firmly. She smiled through the phone. That's a start. The decision felt heavy, but right. His first day at the company came quickly. Walking into the office, John felt out of place at first, but Catherine introduced him with pride, highlighting his service and character. The staff greeted him warmly, not with pity, but with respect. For the first time in years, John felt valued beyond his past. Work was challenging, but in ways he welcomed. His discipline and problem-solving found new purpose in Catherine's business. He was no longer just surviving, he was contributing. Each day ended with a small sense of accomplishment, the kind he hadn't felt since the army. Slowly, his pride found new footing. At home, Emily noticed the change immediately. Her father smiled more, carried himself taller, and seemed lighter. "You're different, Daddy," she said one evening. "Happier." John nodded, pulling her close. "Maybe I am," he admitted. It wasn't just a job. It was the first real step toward rebuilding their lives. As weeks passed, Catherine became a steady presence in John and Emily's lives. She invited them to dinners, community events, and even Emily's school play. Her involvement was gentle, never forced. John noticed the way Emily lit up when Catherine was around. It was as if she had found another anchor. John, however, remained cautious. His trust had been broken too many times to give easily. But Catherine never pushed. She showed up consistently, proving through actions what words could never match. She respected his boundaries while quietly standing by his side. Slowly, the walls around his heart began to lower. One evening, Catherine joined them for dinner at John's modest home. The table was simple, spaghetti and salad, but the warmth of family filled the room. Emily laughed freely, telling stories from school. John listened, his eyes softening as Catherine encouraged every word. It felt like a family, even if unspoken. After dinner, Emily pulled out an old board game. "Let's play," she insisted. They sat together, the game sparking laughter and light-hearted banter. John couldn't remember the last time he had laughed so much in his own home. The sound of joy, echoing through the walls, felt like healing. Later that night, after Emily went to bed, John and Catherine sat on the porch. The stars stretched across the Ohio sky, silent and eternal. "It's been a long time since this house felt alive," John admitted. Catherine smiled softly. "Sometimes all it takes is letting people in." Her words lingered. John looked at her, struggling with the feelings rising inside. Part of him wanted to keep her at arm's length, afraid of losing again. But another part longed to trust, to believe that kindness could stay. Catherine didn't press, but her steady gaze made it clear she wasn't going anywhere. In the days that followed, Catherine became part of their routine. She helped Emily with school projects, attended Sunday services with them, and shared quiet meals. It wasn't about romance yet, it was about trust. For John, that foundation mattered more than anything else. Slowly the bond grew stronger. At work, John excelled in ways that surprised even him. Catherine praised his leadership, often telling others how his discipline shaped the team. Instead of embarrassment, John began to feel pride again. He wasn't defined by his struggles, he was defined by his resilience. The company became more than a job. It became a calling, but the biggest change was at home. Emily thrived with Catherine's presence, seeing her father laugh more and worry less. She told her friends proudly that her dad was important again. For John, Hearing those words was both humbling and healing. He realized Emily's faith in him had never wavered. As autumn leaves began to fall, John stood on his porch, watching Catherine and Emily laugh together. For the first time in years, his heart felt full. He knew trust didn't rebuild overnight, but step by step, moment by moment, it was happening. And this time he wasn't walking alone. Winter settled over Ohio with its biting chill, and life seemed to quiet under the weight of snow. John's days grew longer at work, but his nights were filled with laughter at home. Emily had grown attached to Catherine, and John couldn't deny the comfort her presence brought. For the first time in years, hope seemed steady, but life has a way of testing hope. One evening Emily came down with a sudden fever. Her small body shivered, her cheeks flushed red with heat. John's heart pounded with fear as he held her, remembering battles he could not control. He had faced war zones, but nothing terrified him more than his little girl's weakness. Panic overtook his chest. He rushed to the medicine cabinet only to find it nearly empty. Money had been tight, and stocking up had fallen down the list. His hands shook as he searched, his breath ragged with helplessness. "Hold on, baby girl," he whispered, tears burning his eyes. The weight of failure pressed hard against his chest. Just as despair tightened around him, headlights cut across the driveway. Catherine stepped out, carrying a bag of medicine and supplies. She had received his frantic call and rushed over without hesitation. "I've got her," she said calmly, moving past him into the house. Her steady presence was a lifeline. She knelt beside Emily, soothing her with a cool cloth and soft words. Then, almost instinctively, she began humming an old hymn. "God Bless America," one her father used to sing. John froze in the doorway, his heart breaking. That same hymn had been sung by his late wife years before. Tears welled in his eyes as he leaned against the wall, unable to hold them back. For the first time in years he let someone see his vulnerability. Catherine looked up briefly, her eyes meeting his. She didn't judge him. She only offered quiet strength. But that moment, John knew he wasn't alone. Hours passed slowly as Emily's fever began to break. John sat at her bedside, Catherine by his side. Together they watched over the little girl who meant everything to him. The room felt like sacred ground, where weakness became strength and fear turned into faith. He whispered, "Thank you," barely holding back emotion. Catherine placed her hand gently on his. "You don't have to carry it all by yourself," she said softly. John swallowed hard, nodding. Pride had always been his armor, but tonight it had cracked wide open, and through that crack light found its way in. When Emily finally slept peacefully, John stepped outside for air. The cold night wrapped around him as he looked at the stars. He thought of his fallen brothers, of promises made and broken, and of the family he had nearly lost tonight. His knees weakened, but his resolve grew stronger. For the first time in years he prayed with full conviction. "Lord, help me be the man they need," he whispered. Behind him, Catherine stood silently, hearing the words. She placed a steady hand on his shoulder. John didn't turn. He didn't have to. Somehow, he knew she would stand beside him. Months later, John found himself in a different place than he had been before. He was still working hard, still raising Emily, but now he carried himself with a newfound pride. Catherine's faith in him and Emily's constant love had reshaped his spirit. For the first time in a long time, he felt worthy again. Catherine's company was preparing for a major launch, a patriotic event honoring farmers, veterans, and community leaders. She asked John to help organize, trusting his discipline and leadership. At first he resisted, afraid to step into the spotlight. But Catherine encouraged him. "This is your moment," she said firmly. The day of the event, John wore a clean suit for the first time in years. Emily helped fix his tie, her small hands fumbling but determined. "You look like a hero," she said proudly. Her words filled his chest with warmth. He kissed her forehead, whispering, "I'll do this for you." The hall was decorated with American flags, banners of red, white, and blue, and photos of veterans. People filled the seats, waiting for the program to begin. John stood backstage, nerves building in his chest. He thought of the diner months ago when humiliation had nearly crushed him. Tonight he stood taller. When Catherine introduced him to the crowd, her voice was filled with pride. "This is John Miller," she said, "a man of honor who represents the values America is built on." The applause erupted, echoing through the hall. John stepped forward slowly, humbled by the respect surrounding him. He spoke simply, not with rehearsed words, but from the heart. "I may not have wealth, but I've learned that real strength is found in sacrifice, in family, and in never giving up." His voice trembled, but it carried truth. The crowd grew silent, listening intently. His words touched something deep. Emily watched from the front row, her eyes shining with pride. For her, this wasn't just her father speaking. It was her hero reminding the world of what mattered most. Catherine glanced at Emily and smiled, knowing this moment would shape her for life. As John stepped down from the stage, people stood to applaud. Veterans saluted him, children clapped, and families nodded in respect. He shook hands, humbled but proud. For once he wasn't invisible. He was seen for the man he truly was, a soldier, a father, and a patriot. Catherine met him with a proud smile. "You did more than speak," she said. "You reminded people what honor looks like." John lowered his head, overwhelmed by the weight of her words. For years he had doubted his worth. Tonight that doubt was silenced. Walking out of the hall, Emily slipped her hand into his. "Daddy," she whispered, "you're everything you told me to believe in." John's heart swelled as he squeezed her hand. For the first time in years he fully believed her. His worth had never left. It had only been waiting to be seen. The winter sun dipped low as John walked toward the familiar small-town diner. Months ago he had entered this place filled with humiliation and doubt. Tonight it was different. He wasn't coming alone. Emily held his hand, her face bright with joy, and Catherine walked beside him with quiet confidence. The bell above the door chimed as they stepped inside. The smell of grilled steak and apple pie wrapped warmly around them. The same walls still displayed flags and veteran photos, but tonight the place felt new. Instead of shame, laughter carried in with them. John's heart swelled with gratitude. They slid into the same booth where John had once waited alone. Emily giggled as she climbed into the seat, her energy filling the space. Catherine sat across from them, her eyes meeting John's with a knowing smile. For a moment, John thought back to that painful night. Now, the memory no longer hurt. The waitress approached, recognizing him instantly. "Good to see you back, Mr. Miller," she said kindly. This time her smile wasn't pity, it was respect. She glanced at Catherine and Emily, then nodded approvingly. John returned the smile, his shoulders relaxed. He finally felt at peace inside these walls. As they ordered, Emily leaned across the table. "Daddy, this is my favorite place now," she said proudly. Her words melted John's heart. He glanced at Catherine, who chuckled softly. "It's the people who make a place special," she said. John knew she was right. This diner was no longer a place of pain. Conversation flowed easily, filled with laughter and light-hearted stories. John found himself smiling more than he had in years. Catherine asked Emily about school, listening intently to every detail. John sat quietly for a moment, simply soaking in the sight of them together. It felt like a picture of the life he thought he'd lost. As dinner ended, John lifted his coffee cup, holding it steady. "To second chances," he said simply. Catherine raised her glass of water, and Emily lifted her soda. They clinked together, the small sound echoing with meaning. For John, it wasn't just a toast. It was a declaration of hope. When they left the diner, the night air was crisp and still. The American flag outside swayed gently in the breeze. John paused, staring at it for a long moment. He thought about battles fought, sacrifices made, and the quiet victories that shaped men like him. This time he didn't feel invisible. Emily slipped her small hand back into his, her smile radiant. "Daddy," she whispered, "we're a team now." Catherine walked beside them, her presence steady, her heart open. Together they stepped into the night, not as strangers brought together by chance, but as a family bound by resilience and love. John glanced once more at the diner behind him, remembering where the journey began. The pain of that night would never erase, but it had led him here, to dignity, to faith, to belonging. With Catherine at his side and Emily in his arms, he knew the truth at last. The greatest battles are won in the quiet fight to keep believing in second chances.